The second status quo. Where do you go? Monday, February 17, 2014, 1:30 a.m. Once again I'm waking to a strange bed in a strange room. I've had a late night, getting into bed at 1:30 a.m., although on Perth time it was only 10:30 p.m., and now I'm feeling the grit and weight of too little sleep and too much adrenaline. The latter makes me sit up even though my body is protesting that it wants to lie back down. It is, after all, only 4 a.m. according to my body clock. The bedroom faces south, so that the morning light is an indirect, almost autumnal yellow, cutting in sharply from the left and burnishing the double brick edging that frames the giant warehouse windows. I move a reluctant and sleepy Bugsy away from me, crawl out from under the silk covers, and head towards the wrought iron double French doors, then out onto the balcony, where I am greeted by the cool morning air, the mixed scent of ozone and diesel, and the sudden drone and occasional honking of distant traffic. Our big city is coming to life. If you haven't guessed, I'm on the upper floor in the master suite of what I assume to be Frank's pad in Melbourne. I'll need to retrace my steps to explain how I got here. Even though I haven't exactly travelled far in a personal sense, i.e. it's not like I just jumped on a plane and flew here, it has still been one hell of a ride. Okay, so where to begin? After Kylie went off to yoga, I decided to head up to Frank's again. It wasn't really something I wanted to do. Left to my own devices, I would have preferred to have forgotten the whole thing. All I really felt like doing was surfing the net for a bit and maybe listening to some music. Other than that, I was rather looking forward to watching My Kitchen Rules that night. But, quite obviously, I was now in way too deep to back out. As my late grandfather, Deda Zdravko, used to say, Zagrizo si govno, sada mora da progotaš. This translates literally as, you've bitten off a piece of turd, now you might as well swallow it. It's difficult to put into words the sense of trepidation, indeed abject terror, that overwhelmed me as I realized the reality of both my actions so far and the future course to which I was committed. Consider that in just over a month I had lurched from a life of mundane predictability to one of reckless abandon. Where my existence was once typified by a depressing routine, it now oscillates between manic extremes. One moment I feel drunk with impulsive, confident power. The next I'm flooded with impotence-inducing self-doubt, counting the ways in which my ill-conceived plans might, and probably will, unravel. Take my latest lie to Kylie, for example. I can kid myself that everything is going to work out fine, that she isn't going to tell a soul about the so-called secret promotion. But the odds are strong she has already told Yvonne and Leanne. She would have told them immediately after yoga. She has probably told her mother. Within a week my own mother will know, either via Tula or directly from Kylie. And it's really not a stretch to assume that within a month, word of mouth will have spread the story to the four corners of the globe, including the offices of Dixon, Cox, and Peters. What in the world could I have been thinking? At the same time, I have to be realistic. How else would I have explained our soon-to-be boosted bank balance? Kylie would have noticed it sooner or later. I simply had to make up something, and my impromptu story was probably as good as it was ever going to get. Because you see, I'm not used to lying. Clearly, I'm also not very good at it, as my latest faux fainting escapade suggests. Good liars plan things well in advance. They have all bases covered. I don't even know where the relevant bases are. Despite this, I remember feeling somewhat comforted by the fact that, up till that moment, I'd always managed to land on my feet. I chalked it down to innate good luck. I was hoping that this luck would continue. Besides, having embarked on this particular, desperate course of action, I have had little choice but to carry on. One lie necessitates another, which necessitates another. At the point Kylie left for yoga, I truly had bitten off a big piece of turd, and there seemed little reason not to swallow it. So with grim resolve, I quickly brushed my teeth, combed my hair to the right, as I always do, and went to pack. I pulled out my large suitcase and put in my suits, all of my office shirts, except those in the wash, my ties, undies, socks, shaving gear, you name it. I knew I had to hurry. Kylie would be back in just under 2 hours, and everything would have to be back in its usual place before then. Had I more time to think about it, I suspect hesitation might have set in. But hesitation had become the worst enemy of my newfound self, so I hurried even more. I grabbed the heavily packed suitcase and heaved it into the boot. Bugsy could sense that I was up to something and was swishing between my legs. As an afterthought, I scooped him up and put him in the passenger seat. The new me might as well have his best friend along for the ride. At least Bugsy would be right way round again. Talking about best friends, as I was driving I couldn't help thinking about Frank's and my relationship during my formative years. He was more of a parent to me than either Mum or Dad. That's despite the fact that he's only my uncle, and only 15 years older than I am. Frank is virtually omnipresent in my childhood memories, even the earliest ones back in the days we lived in Tanap, deep in the southwest. Mum and Dad were trying to run a little bakery there, while Deda Zdravko and Baba Vera ran an orchard and fruit winery. Even after Frank went off to university, he would still drive down almost every weekend to hang out with me, not his parents or elder brother, my father. And while Dad was inclined to be absent and somewhat distracted even when present throughout my childhood, even when we moved up to Perth, Frank was the opposite. He was the one who taught me to ride a bike, who played catch with me and checked my homework. We were buddies. Like all buddies, we had our rituals, secret handshakes and the like. I suspect Frank enjoyed the whole thing more than I did. One such ritual was the pinky promise. It was an idea I adopted in middle primary school. Frank initially sneered at it, but then seemed to embrace it wholeheartedly. The rule was you could never break a pinky promise, no matter what. Of course, by the time I went to high school, we stopped this ritual, but it was something that neither of us forgot. When Kylie and I got married, I could tell that he was unhappy with me, so unhappy that I sensed I might be losing his friendship. So, towards the end of our wedding reception, in a somewhat drunken state, I went up to Frank and asked him to pinky promise that he would never abandon me. Of course, he just laughed and said, "There's no need for that, mate." But when he noticed how earnest I was, he added, "Okay then, if you really want to. Come over here, you big idiot." There we were, two grown men linking fingers in a playground ritual. I don't care if anyone saw us. Wedding receptions are full of inanity anyway. Which brings me back to my drive up to Frank's place. I was thinking about that pinky promise and wondering if I could apply it to myself. If you haven't guessed already, my big plan has comprised making a copy of myself and printing it in Melbourne. Why? I simply can't, face the prospect of erasing my original self. And instead, it seems, much better to create another me. Besides, two of us can do much more than one. As I pressed on with my audacious plan, I knew I had to keep remembering this fundamental fact. We would both be me. We were going to be one and the same person. One of us would have to reconcile himself to being D2, to the other's D1. Are you thinking what I'm thinking, D1? I think I am D2. So it was inevitable that at some point I would find myself in one of two possible positions. I'd either be walking out of the studio at Frank's place in Wanneroo, then driving home to Kylie, D1, or I'd be in a totally different place, D2, If ever I needed to remind myself which one I was, all I'd have to do is check in the mirror. The back-to-front image would give it away. So, pulling up outside Frank's house, I told myself the following. D1 has first dibs on being Dan. D2 is just there to help. That was going to be the rule. Both of us would have this same memory. Both of us would be bound by the same pinky promise to adhere to the rule. So if and when the time came for D2 to be erased, we'd have to do it. Dan would carry on, but only in the form of D1. It seemed to me that this was far better than Frank's solution, which was to keep erasing himself over and over again. At least I only had to do it once, and I'd only have to do it to the copy, not the original. Having said this to myself, I solemnly linked my two little fingers, mirrors of each other. Bugsy watched me curiously. After that, I pulled the suitcase out of the boot and into the house, manhandled it down to the basement, and dragged it into the recording booth. Back at the console, I opened Profile Generator 3.2, clicked Record without null, selected Melbourne as the printing destination, walked into the booth, and let the door shut behind me. It is self-closing, as you might recall. I took a deep breath and stayed absolutely still. Does it matter if you move around during the transporter process? As you might expect, I was sweating profusely. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel a throbbing in my temples. I was even feeling faint. Of course, this was just my usual reaction to stress. There I stood, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. I waited and waited, still nothing, nada. I finally gave myself permission to move, inching very gingerly towards the window of the recording booth to look out. When I got there, everything seemed exactly the same. Then it occurred to me. Of course nothing had changed. I was D1, not D2. So far, so good. D2 must already be in Melbourne. At least I hoped he was. Part of the pinky promise was for D2 to send an email to D1 upon arrival. Given how long I'd been waiting in the booth, I decided to go straight to the computer to check for it. I opened the door and walked outward towards the mixing desk, getting ready to dodge the microphone stands and cables. Except I didn't have to. Someone had stacked them neatly to one side. Then I noticed other differences. The pile of Rolling Stone magazines was missing. There was a poster of Bruce Springsteen on the wall opposite the recording booth door that hadn't been there before. In fact, the entire studio, while adhering to the same floor plan, was significantly different. The staircase down to the studio, not visible from the recording booth window, came from the opposite wall. Other fittings were also differently designed and constructed. For example, the bench to which the mixing desk was mounted was slightly higher and laminated with a different color and pattern. The walls behind the monitors were red, not blue. It seemed I wasn't D1 after all. I was D2. I ran to the computer screen and noticed it was on power-saving mode. After prodding it into life, I opened Outlook and clicked into the recipient box. It only took one character, P, for the address book to find the Perth address. I wanted to compose a quick message, but my hands started typing gibberish. I was forced to revert to single-finger typing with my left hand. Hi, D1. I'm here and all is well, I think. This tapying is a bugger. Hurry home or you'll be L8. Speak L8R. Maybe Skype D2.